Have you ever stopped to imagine what your life would be like if everything you wrote on a simple piece of paper began to come true? What if I told you that an ordinary woman named Esther completely transformed her life just by writing the future she desired, night after night before going to sleep? Could this be a coincidence, or is there a far greater power behind what we call the law of attraction? Esther's story is real, moving, and deeply inspiring. It shows how a simple practice called scripting was able to rewrite the destiny of someone who had lost faith in herself. At 28 years old, living in Manchester, England, Esther led a life that seemed normal to many, but carried a silent weight inside. She worked in an administrative office, surrounded by piles of papers, repetitive routines, and a clock that seemed to mock her every second. Her days were all the same: wake up early, endure traffic, spend hours in front of a screen, and return home with the feeling that nothing in her life was really happening. What hurt her the most, however, was not just the monotony, but the deep sense of stagnation. She watched colleagues advance professionally, friends traveling, getting married, experiencing life fully, while she remained trapped in a cycle that seemed unbreakable. Often at night, lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, she wondered, is this really the life I deserve? Is this all there is for me? And in that moment, the answer seemed to be yes. Esther carried accumulated frustrations, failed relationships, dreams that never left the page, interrupted projects. It was as if every new attempt at change was suffocated before it could even bloom. She began to believe she was unlucky, that she wasn't special, that she was destined only to survive, not to truly live. It was in this state of despair that the first sign arrived. On a rainy Saturday afternoon, aimlessly browsing YouTube, a video caught her attention. The title read, "Write the life of your dreams and watch the impossible happen." At first, she almost closed the tab. It sounded like yet another exaggerated promise spreading online. But there was something different in the way the narrator spoke. It wasn't just superficial motivation. There was emotion, sincerity, and real examples. The woman in the video spoke about scripting, a simple but incredibly powerful practice. Writing your life as if you were already living what you desired, describing every detail with emotion, repeating it until the universe responded. Esther was intrigued. It wasn't the first time she had heard about the law of attraction, but she had always thought it was too distant, almost unattainable. This time, however, something inside her resonated differently. What if I try? What do I have to lose? She thought. That very night, she took an old notebook that had been tucked away at the back of a drawer. It was a blue-covered notebook, slightly worn, which she had bought to start a diary but never got past the first pages. She took a deep breath, opened the notebook, and wrote at the top, "My new life begins here." For a few minutes, she stared at the blank page. Part of her felt ridiculous, like she was playing a child's game, but another part felt a silent calling to put on paper what her soul longed for so deeply. With a trembling hand, she wrote, "I am so happy and grateful now that I live in my dream apartment, a bright place with a balcony where I can have coffee in the morning, feeling the fresh breeze and listening to the birds." For the first time in a long time, Esther genuinely smiled. That night, before going to sleep, she read her words again, trying to feel every detail. She closed her eyes, and for a few moments, it was as if she were truly there, living it. The next morning, she woke up strangely light. Nothing in her reality had magically changed, but something inside her felt different. It was as if she had planted a seed. During the day, she recalled what she had written. At work, instead of staring lifelessly at the screen, she imagined opening the window of a sunlit apartment. This simple exercise brought a new energy. What she didn't know was that at that moment she had activated something invisible but real, the frequency of creation. The following days were not easy. There was a persistent voice inside her saying, "You're wasting your time. None of this is real. You'll never have this life." But each night she chose to silence that voice. She would take the blue notebook, write another page, and describe new scenes: a better job, a healthy relationship, travels, true friends, a future where she finally felt fulfilled. She wrote everything as if she were already living it. Gradually, this practice went from feeling strange to becoming necessary, like a ritual that restored her hope. Still, Esther constantly questioned herself. Could writing really change her destiny? What if it was just a coincidence? What if she was fooling herself again? But there was an even more powerful question that kept her from giving up. What if it really works? That simple question was the key, the spark of hope that kept her going, even without immediate proof. 2 weeks after starting her practice, something curious happened. On the way to work, she decided to stop at a cafe she rarely visited. As she entered, she felt a shiver. The place was exactly as she had described in the notebook. Soft lighting, the smell of fresh coffee, a small balcony with outdoor tables. She sat there, ordered a cappuccino, and for a few minutes, it was as if she were living her own writing. It moved her deeply. For many, it was just a coincidence. For her, it was a clear sign that the universe was responding. That night, she returned home and opened the blue notebook again, but this time not with mere hope, but with a quiet certainty. Something inside her said, "Keep going. You are on the right path." And so it began. Night after night before sleeping, Esther wrote her future. Night after night, she surrendered to the power of imagination and gratitude. Little did she know that this simple ritual would become the bridge to a destiny she could never have predicted. After that first synchronistic experience at the cafe, Esther realized she could no longer ignore what was happening. This was not just any coincidence, but a clear response to something she had asked of the universe. The mere fact of encountering an environment so similar to what she had described in her blue notebook made her believe, for the first time in a long while, that perhaps a greater force was guiding her steps. That night, when she got home, she sat on her bed with the notebook in her lap, and even before picking up the pen, she took a deep breath. She felt that she was no longer merely writing imaginary stories, but planting real seeds that, in some mysterious way, would begin to bloom. It was in that moment that Esther decided to turn scripting into a ritual. It would no longer be an occasional activity done whenever she had spare time, but a sacred practice repeated every night before sleep. She knew that if she wanted to see real changes, she needed to immerse herself fully in the process. So she began preparing the environment in a special way. Every night she would turn off the lights in the room, leaving only a soft, cozy lamp on. She played calming instrumental music, usually piano or guitar melodies, which helped her mind relax. Sometimes she would light a lavender-scented candle, whose fragrance filled the space and created an atmosphere of calm and introspection. Before opening the notebook, Esther would close her eyes and take 3 deep breaths, as if she wanted to clear the day's thoughts and make room for the new. Then she would open to the next blank page, write the date, and begin to write. But she didn't write just scattered wishes or quick sentences. She allowed herself to describe entire scenes as if she were living them in that very moment. One night, for example, she wrote about a new job. Instead of simply jotting down, "I have a good job," she described the environment, the people, the feeling of gratitude upon waking up with excitement, the joy of feeling useful and appreciated. She even wrote about the smile of the colleague who greeted her every day at the office, and the sensation of drinking coffee in the bright meeting room. These were not just words, they were mental images brought to life through writing. As the days passed, she realized that the more emotion she put on the pages, the more alive she felt. There were moments when tears ran down her face as she wrote, not from sadness, but from an intense mixture of relief, hope, and faith. Other times, she would finish writing with a smile so big she could hardly fall asleep. Such was the positive energy that filled her. Still, there were nights when doubt struck hard. Sometimes, as she lay down, the inner voice would return, questioning, "Are you just fooling yourself? What if none of this happens? What if you're only writing fantasies?" At these times, Esther would take a deep breath and remember the cafe. To her, that had been the clearest sign that the universe was listening. And even without concrete proof, she continued steadfast in her ritual. One of the things that helped her most in this process was creating a notebook exclusively for scripting. She abandoned the idea of using the old blue notebook and bought a new one specifically for this practice. She chose it carefully, hard-covered, golden color with subtle details, thick, smooth pages. To her, this object was more than a notebook. It was a symbol of her new life. She decided to call it My Book of Destiny. Every word written there would be a seed for the future. Over time, Esther began noticing small changes within herself. Her posture at work improved, her energy increased, and even the way she spoke to others became more confident. She had not yet received the dream job, nor moved into the sunlit apartment with a balcony, but she no longer... It was curious to observe how Esther's life was beginning to move in almost imperceptible ways. Nothing grand had happened yet. She hadn't won the lottery, nor moved into the apartment of her dreams. But the universe seemed to start whispering in small details. And it was precisely these details that gave her more strength to continue. One morning, as she left home for work, she noticed a huge poster at a bus stop that read, "The life you desire is already on its way." Simple words, part of an ordinary advertisement, but for her it was impossible not to connect them to what she had been writing in her golden notebook every night. She smiled to herself, as if the universe had sent her a personalized message just to remind her she was on the right path. A few days later, another sign appeared. While talking to a colleague about travel, she heard her mention exactly the destination she had described in one of her pages, Barcelona. What was even more surprising was that her colleague, unaware of anything, commented on the feeling of walking through the narrow streets of the Gothic Quarter, something Esther had written almost word for word weeks before. A shiver ran down her spine. This could not be mere coincidence. Esther began to notice that these small manifestations were not random occurrences, but confirmations that her energy was aligned with what she desired. It was as if the universe was saying, "Keep going, I'm listening to you." This perception completely changed her relationship with the scripting practice. Before, she wrote with effort, trying to believe. Now she wrote with genuine enthusiasm, like someone already receiving unexpected gifts. Each night she immersed herself in new descriptions. One of the most intense pages she wrote was about a healthy relationship, something she had always dreamed of but never truly experienced. She described the feeling of waking up beside someone who looked at her with affection, sharing laughter over morning coffee, feeling support and mutual respect in every gesture. As she wrote, she could almost hear the laughter of this imaginary person, and for a few moments she believed he was already part of her life. Then the signs related to this desire began to appear as well. One morning, as she exited the subway, a stranger accidentally bumped into her. When she turned to apologize, he smiled and said exactly the phrase she had written in her notebook 3 days earlier. Sometimes stumbles are just the universe's way of bringing us closer. Esther froze for a few seconds, trying to understand how it was possible. The scene seemed straight out of her own pages. Of course, she didn't fall in love with this man instantly, but it was strong enough to make her believe even more that she was truly writing her future. It was as if the universe were rehearsing, testing the first acts of the play she had scripted herself. At the same time, her emotional life began to change. People noticed a difference in her behavior. Her co-workers, who were used to seeing her quiet and withdrawn, now observed that Esther was more cheerful, communicative, and lighthearted. Even her physical posture changed. She held her shoulders higher and walked with more confidence. The energy she radiated was no longer the same. And, like a domino effect, new opportunities began to emerge. One day, her boss called her in for a conversation. Esther feared the worst. She thought she might have made a mistake, but to her surprise, he praised her dedication and invited her to participate in a special project that required more responsibility. It wasn't the dream job she had described in detail, but it was a significant step towards something bigger. That night, while writing in her notebook, Esther realized that she didn't need to wait for the full manifestation of her desires to feel gratitude. Every small sign, every coincidence, every subtle change was already proof that she was on the right path. And that's how her faith stopped being just an attempt to believe and became certainty. Even so, there were difficult days. There were mornings when she woke up tired and skeptical, wondering if all of this was just a product of her imagination. At times, she looked at her life and saw that, despite the signs, nothing had changed concretely yet. But instead of giving up, she remembered what she had already experienced. She recalled the cafe, the poster, the stranger's phrase, the invitation at work. And that was enough to keep going. What Esther didn't realize at that moment was that she was going through what many call the phase of subtle signs, a period when the universe begins showing small indications that the path is being laid, preparing the ground for major transformations. And in this process, the greatest change was happening within herself. The simple act of writing every night connected her to a version of herself that was already living that life. With each page, she felt less like a prisoner of the past and more like the creator of her own future. It was as if she were training her mind to accept that it was possible. One night, after an intense writing session, Esther lay down with tears in her eyes. They weren't tears of sadness, but of emotion. She realized she no longer needed to see everything happening immediately to feel happiness. Happiness was in the journey, in the signs, in the small confirmations. It was in the simple fact of waking up every day with hope. The most remarkable thing was that the more she believed in these signs, the more they appeared. It was as if reality responded to the level of faith she cultivated. Small encounters, phrases overheard by chance, images on billboards, songs on the radio, everything seemed to carry hidden messages connected to the pages of her golden notebook. And deep down, Esther knew that this was just the beginning. Time seemed to flow at a different rhythm for Esther. From the moment she began applying the law of attraction with dedication and discipline, she noticed her life transforming into a constant stream of small confirmations. At first, they were only subtle signs, like finding a white feather on the sidewalk after asking the universe for a signal, or receiving an unexpected message from someone she had thought of moments before. These seemingly insignificant details became the fuel for her faith. But now, after months of internal alignment, daily affirmations, and consistent visualizations, Esther was about to witness a giant leap in her reality. It all began with her financial situation. For years, she had struggled with the idea of abundance. She had grown up in an environment where money was always scarce, and the phrases repeated during her childhood still echoed in her mind. Money doesn't grow on trees. To earn something, you must suffer. People like us will never have much. These beliefs had taken root so deeply that even as an adult, Esther lived in a constant cycle of limitations. Low salaries, piling bills, and unexpected expenses that seemed to appear out of nowhere. However, with her new understanding of the law of attraction, she began to see these patterns as internal reflections of her own mental programming. If she wanted to create a different reality, she would need to radically transform her relationship with money. So she began practicing daily visualizations of abundance. She didn't just close her eyes and imagine having more money. Esther created detailed, almost tangible scenes. She visualized opening her mailbox and finding unexpected checks, logging into her online bank account and seeing the numbers growing surprisingly. More than seeing, she felt the emotion of financial freedom. Her heart raced, a sense of expansion coursed through her body, as if she were truly living that abundance. And that was exactly when the magic began. In the first week, Esther received an unexpected call from a former client of her small design business, whom she had almost forgotten. This client, impressed with past work, decided to recommend Esther to an entire network of contacts.
Within days, new contracts appeared that quadrupled her monthly income. Esther was in shock. She remembered the hours she had spent visualizing happy clients, signed contracts, and her bank account growing. Now life was presenting exactly that scene before her eyes. But it didn't stop there. Shortly after, she was surprised by a bank deposit from a tax refund for previous years. The amount was significant, almost unbelievable, and it arrived precisely at the moment she had mentally pictured unexpected money coming to me. Esther began laughing to herself. The universe seemed to be playing with her, showing that everything that had once seemed impossible was just waiting for her permission to manifest. Abundance was no longer a distant idea. It was real, tangible, present. But the financial aspect was just the first piece of a much larger puzzle. Esther's transformation expanded into all areas of her life. One of Esther's greatest desires had always been to live in a home that reflected her true essence. For years, she had lived in small, dark apartments that conveyed only survival, not the energy of a home. However, in her visualizations, she constantly saw herself walking through a spacious house, bathed in morning sunlight, with large windows and a garden full of colorful flowers. She described every detail: the living room with light-colored walls, the smell of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen, the morning songs of birds. Each element was cultivated in her imagination with such clarity that when she closed her eyes, she no longer knew whether she was merely dreaming or actually living it. A few months later, while browsing a real estate website without any expectations, Esther came across a house that seemed to have emerged directly from her.
Esther had already understood that the journey of manifestation was not just about achieving something external, but primarily about transforming from within. After months immersed in study, practice, and the discipline of aligning her thoughts, feelings, and actions, she realized that something much deeper was happening in her life. It was not merely the material dream approaching, but a state of consciousness she had never experienced before. What had once been an effort now became almost natural. Her thoughts no longer clung to the old scarcity beliefs, nor to the inner voices telling her she was incapable. Gradually, these voices faded, as if losing strength in the face of the new identity she was building. Esther was no longer the young woman who doubted herself and waited for life to prove something to her. She had now become living proof that life responds in proportion to how much a person allows themselves to believe. The first sign of this new state was subtle. Walking through the streets of her city, she noticed everything seemed more vibrant. The trees looked greener, the air felt lighter, the people closer. It wasn't that the world had changed, but her eyes were now trained to perceive abundance and beauty where she had once seen only obstacles. This simple shift in perception made her feel wealthy, even before material reality confirmed it. With this new awareness, Esther began to act differently. She no longer sought immediate results to feel good. Instead, she cultivated peace and gratitude first, knowing that the rest would naturally follow. She began writing every morning in her journal a list of things she was grateful for, from the smallest details to the greatest achievements she had already accomplished. She noticed that the more she expressed gratitude, the more reasons appeared to be grateful. It was as if life responded generously to her elevated vibration. Then something unexpected happened. An invitation arrived suddenly from someone she barely knew, but who had heard about her ideas and the project she had been developing. This invitation placed her in front of an opportunity that seemed tailor-made, as if the universe had orchestrated every detail so she would be in that exact place and moment. Upon entering that meeting, Esther felt a wave of familiarity. It was as if she had already experienced this before, and in a way she had, because she had visualized countless similar situations during her creative imagination practices. What was most remarkable was not just the opportunity itself, but how she reacted. Before, she would have felt fear, insecurity, and doubt, but now her stance was one of absolute confidence. She spoke with clarity, conveyed certainty, and inspired trust in those around her. She realized that the true power of the law of attraction was not just in attracting events, but in transforming herself so that she could be ready when those events arrived. As her life expanded, Esther began receiving comments from friends and acquaintances. Many said she seemed different, more serene, more radiant. Some even asked what the secret of her energy was. Esther smiled, knowing there was no secret, just a daily decision to align mind and heart. Yet there were also challenges. With each new step, the old world seemed eager to pull her back. Some close people began criticizing her, saying she was dreaming too big, that she should be more realistic. At other times, unexpected situations tried to shake her confidence, like delays, technical failures, or even meaningless arguments. But Esther no longer reacted as she once had. She understood that all of this was part of the process, that each challenge was a kind of test to see whether her faith was genuine or fragile. And it was in these moments that she grew the most. Instead of succumbing to fear, she returned to silence, took a deep breath, and remembered the promise she had made to herself, to live life from the state of the desired outcome. She repeated mentally, "I already am. I already have. I already live." These words became an invisible shield, a bridge reconnecting her with the future that was already real in her imagination. Interestingly, the more she let go of the desperate need to control when and how things would happen, the faster everything flowed. It was as if life had been waiting only for the moment she released the reins to begin surprising her. Thus, Esther realized that the true reward was not the object of desire, but the state of trust and surrender. Even so, external manifestations began appearing in sequence. Small financial gains from unexpected sources, the right people coming into her path, information arriving exactly when needed. Every detail seemed carefully orchestrated, and in all of them, Esther saw the same signature, the invisible hand of the universe responding to what she had already felt within herself. The pinnacle of this period came on an ordinary day, when she received a message confirming the fulfillment of one of the greatest dreams she had been nurturing from the beginning. It was no surprise. In fact, she only felt a deep sense of recognition. It was as if she were saying to herself, "Of course this happened. I have already lived this so many times inside me that it could only manifest externally." In that instant, tears streamed down her face. But they were not tears of surprise. They were tears of gratitude. Esther understood that every night of doubt, every act of faith, every small choice to believe had built that moment. She had not merely achieved something, she had transformed into someone who knew without a shadow of doubt that life responds to the vibration we emit. And so, the invisible reward became visible, not only in the material result now in her hands, but in the unshakable certainty that she could co-create her reality in any area of life. Esther's days were now marked by a serenity that had once seemed impossible. She had learned to live in a state of trust, allowing life to flow rather than trying to control every detail. Yet deep in her heart, a desire pulsed ever stronger, to receive a clear, undeniable sign showing that the universe was not only listening to her intentions, but responding in a grand, unmistakable way. She had already witnessed small manifestations, unexpected money, work opportunities, chance encounters that shifted her perspective, but she felt something greater was about to happen. It was no longer just about confirming that the law of attraction worked. Now, Esther desired a milestone, concrete evidence that could transform not only her life, but inspire everyone around her. One morning, during her meditation, she asked with all sincerity, "Universe, show me a sign that is impossible to doubt, something so big and unexpected that I cannot explain it any other way as an answer to the faith I have placed."
This request did not come from desperation, but from a place of trust. She knew that by asking, she was already allowing it. And this permission generated an immediate feeling of gratitude, as if the sign had already been delivered. In the days that followed, Esther began noticing extraordinary coincidences. People spoke to her about topics that had been on her mind. Phrases in books and songs seemed to respond directly to her inner questions. And even the places she visited revealed hidden messages in simple details. But she knew all of this was beautiful, yet it was not yet the great sign she had asked for. Then, on an ordinary afternoon, something happened. Esther was invited to attend an event that brought together local entrepreneurs, something she normally would have declined in the past, due to shyness and fear of not being enough. But this time she felt she should go. Upon arriving, she realized the environment was far more inspiring than she had imagined. People shared stories of overcoming challenges, innovative project ideas, and bold dreams. Suddenly, one of the event organizers approached her and, without knowing her deeply, said something that left her in shock. "You know, I was thinking of inviting someone to lead a new social impact project in the city, someone with energy, vision, and faith in the future. When I saw you here, I felt that perhaps you were that person." Esther was speechless. How could someone who barely knew her see exactly what she had been manifesting in her visualizations? The invitation was to coordinate a community project that would unite volunteers, businesses, and local institutions to improve the lives of hundreds of families. It was not just a professional opportunity, it was a calling. In that instant, Esther felt the universe shout through that proposal. It was as if the entire path she had walked, through the tears of despair in the past, the first affirmation spoken with a trembling voice, to the small signs received along the journey, had culminated in that moment. She accepted without hesitation. From that day on, her life took a complete turn. With each meeting, with each decision, she noticed how the pieces fit together. The right people appeared at the right time, resources that had seemed impossible emerged from nowhere, and the results exceeded all expectations. The project prospered quickly, transforming not only the community, but Esther herself. She, who had once doubted herself, now became a reference of strength, faith, and transformation. People came to her seeking inspiration, wanting to understand the secret behind that magnetic energy that seemed to open impossible.
In part of Esther's journey, the world around her seemed to finally respond more clearly and intensely to her intentions. If before the signs were subtle, now the flow of life appeared to synchronize with her thoughts, emotions, and vision of the future. Every step she took felt as if it were carefully orchestrated by an invisible force that opened doors, created opportunities, and connected the right people at the right moments. Esther began to understand that the true magic of the law of attraction was not just in visualizing, but in deeply aligning with the vibration of what she desired. Esther's mornings became a sacred ritual. Even before opening her eyes, she dedicated a few minutes to feeling gratitude for the day ahead. Instead of rushing into daily worries, she consciously chose the emotion she wanted to carry with her: joy, confidence, serenity. This simple habit completely transformed the tone of her life. When she started the day in this elevated state, everything seemed to flow more easily. Traffic, which had once been a source of stress, was now seen as an opportunity to listen to inspiring audios. Everyday challenges became tests of patience and awareness, which she navigated with increasing calm. In her professional life, the results became increasingly visible. Esther not only received invitations for bigger projects, but also began to be recognized as a reference in her field. People sought her advice and guidance, appreciating not only her technical skills, but also the positive energy she radiated. This magnetism was something new, and she understood it came from her inner state, not from an external force. The more she cultivated thoughts aligned with abundance, the more prosperous situations appeared. But it wasn't just about material achievements. The greater transformation was in her perception of life. Esther learned to view events with new eyes. Situations that once would have been labeled as problems were now understood as lessons or signs from the universe. For example, when a project that seemed promising did not materialize, instead of feeling frustrated, she asked herself, "What is the universe trying to show me with this? Where is the hidden opportunity?" Shortly afterward, an even better proposal would appear, proving that trusting the flow was always wiser than clinging to control. Emotionally, Esther also experienced profound changes. Relationships that had once been heavy and draining naturally dissolved, making room for new connections that were more aligned. Friends who shared her values and beliefs began entering her life, creating a circle of support and mutual inspiration. At the same time, people vibrating at lower frequencies simply drifted away, not in conflict, but naturally, according to the course of energies. One of the greatest lessons of this phase was the importance of detachment. Esther realized that the more she tried to force things to happen in a specific way, the more resistance she created. When she relaxed, surrendered, and trusted, everything flowed much more easily. This did not mean abandoning her dreams, but rather believing that the universe knew the best paths and that her role was simply to align vibrationally with them. One day, while walking through a park, Esther had an epiphany. Observing the trees, the birds, and the natural movement of life, she deeply understood that the universe is abundant by nature. Trees do not compete for sunlight. Each receives exactly what it needs. Rivers do not force their course. They simply follow the path nature carved. Likewise, she understood that her life should also follow the flow, trusting that abundance was always available. She only needed to allow herself to receive it. This awakening brought an indescribable sense of lightness. Esther felt a greater connection with the whole, with something higher that had always been there, but that she was only now truly perceiving. It was as if she had finally heard the music that had always played, previously muffled by the noise of limiting thoughts. Now, in tune, she danced to the rhythm of life. And it was in this state that everyday miracles began to intensify. Small coincidences became daily proofs of the power of her vibration. Meeting someone with the exact solution to a problem, receiving an unexpected message with good news, or even finding money precisely when she needed it most. Esther no longer saw these moments as mere chance, but as direct responses to her aligned intentions. With her heart full of gratitude, Esther felt increasingly ready for the next level of her journey. She understood that it was not only about achieving material goods or external accomplishments, but about becoming a more conscious, present person connected to the essence of life. What had once been a desire to transform her reality was now a purpose: to inspire, live in abundance, and be a living example of the power of mind and energy. Thus, with each step, Esther dove deeper into the path of conscious manifestation, discovering that the true transformation was not in what she achieved, but in who she was becoming. In the months that followed, Esther's life continued to expand in ways she could never have imagined. What had once been dreams written in her golden notebook now manifested tangibly in her daily routine. Every desire, every intention carefully detailed in her scripting practices seemed to emerge from the page into reality with astonishing precision. But the greater transformation was not just in material achievements or ideal relationships. It was in who Esther had become. She had become someone who deeply understood the true essence of the law of attraction. External reality is a direct reflection of inner vibration. By aligning her thoughts, emotions, and intentions with absolute confidence, she had learned that the power to co-create did not reside in effort or force, but in tuning in to the natural flow of the universe. This understanding brought Esther a lasting sense of peace, something no external accomplishment could provide on its own. From this elevated state, Esther began to feel a genuine desire to share her experience with others.
Many people close to her had already noticed her transformation, asking how she had achieved such extraordinary results in so little time. She realized that her story could be the spark of transformation that others needed. With care and dedication, Esther began writing detailed accounts of her journey, explaining step by step how she had structured her scripting practices, visualizations, and meditations. She did not hide the moments of doubt or the challenges she faced. On the contrary, she highlighted them as essential parts of the process, showing that true transformation requires patience, persistence, and faith. As she shared her experiences, Esther began receiving messages from people around the world. They wrote to say they felt inspired, motivated, and ready to apply the same practices in their own lives. Parents, professionals, students, entrepreneurs all found in Esther's stories a practicable and real guide for changing their own reality. But for Esther, the most significant realization was seeing that the transformation of each person who reached out reflected her own growth. Each success story, each shared experience created a ripple of positive energy that expanded like waves in a calm lake, touching lives invisibly but profoundly. Spiritually, Esther also reached a level of connection that had once seemed unattainable. She realized that abundance was not limited to what could be touched or measured. There was a wealth of experiences, emotions, and learning that went far beyond the tangible. This understanding made her feel deeply part of something greater, a generous and intelligent universe that always responded to sincere intentions, even when the signs seemed imperceptible. She learned to differentiate between what comes from control and what arises from surrender. Unexpected situations, chance encounters, and unforeseen challenges stopped being sources of stress and became opportunities for growth and learning. And the more Esther allowed herself to trust, the more fluid and light her life became. The manifestations of her desires continued to occur with intensity and precision. Dream trips she had written in her notebook came true. Healthy and harmonious relationships blossomed. Financial opportunities appeared in surprising, almost magical ways. But above all, she had achieved something far greater, the awareness that anyone, in any circumstance, can learn to write their own future with intention, emotion, and faith. Esther began organizing workshops and gatherings, both online and in person, sharing her methodology with increasingly larger groups. Her approach was clear, practical, and inspiring. She showed that there is no magic without discipline, no miracles without surrender. Each participant left these sessions with an action plan, scripting tools, gratitude and visualization exercises, and most importantly, the confidence that they were capable of transforming their own lives. The energy Esther radiated became contagious. People who had never believed in the power of the mind began to experience small changes, and these changes grew as their faith strengthened. For her, this was the ultimate proof that the true law of attraction works when there is genuine internal alignment, and that real transformation is not only personal, it is collective. Walking through her sunlit home, watching the garden bloom, Esther felt infinite gratitude. Every challenge faced, every night of doubt, and every page written had been essential for her to live this full, abundant, and connected life. She smiled, remembering the young girl who had started it alone, with only a notebook and a timid belief that it was possible. In that moment, Esther understood that her mission was now